So welcome to this little screencast of the session about shame and guilt, or guilt and shame, which we took last session, and I thought maybe I'll explain it to you again this way so you can re-listen to it, because it's really important to me that you understand the difference between the emotions of guilt and shame. Here in the middle you see this symbol of a triangle and a circle, and as I explained before in class, this has to do with Freud's idea of the superego and the id. The id is the part of the human psyche where the drives for aggression and lust and things like that reside, and his idea was that if we only had those drives and no structure which would kind of stop those drive and check them, then people would just be running around and killing each other and raping each other and I don't know what. So he thought that there is something like the id and the superego, and I'd like to show you a little bit how Freud and others imagine how this superego comes into being, and then I'll explain to you how this whole thing about shame works. So let's go to this first situation. The idea is that you have a child growing up with some people, maybe father, mother, maybe somebody else, but we call them significant others. And these significant others would teach the child what to do and what not to do. Basically, they would teach them rules. And if the child disobeys, that means if a transgression of the rules occurs, there would be a consequence, some sort of punishment. And what happens is that the child, as it grows up, every time it transgresses the rules, gets punished. After a while, it starts understanding that if I transgress a rule, I have to be scared of some punishment. And that's exactly what happens. As the child develops a superego, it introjects the rules and the significant others. And with the significant others, it also introjects the fear of punishment. And that's basically what our guilt emotion is. It's this remnant of this fear of being punished for something wrong. So every time we see something or want to do something and we feel like, that's wrong, we have this guilt feeling, and that's basically this fear of being punished. Then of course, if things happen, rules are transgressed, there must be a remedy of some sort. And on this side of things, you can apologize, you can basically admit, confess that you did that, which signals to the others that you understand the rules and you want to adhere to them. You can offer to make amendments or to repair something. So, for example, if somebody breaks my computer or loses my keys or something like that, she will come and apologize and say, I'm sorry, I was just kind of an accident, I didn't mean to, and so on and so on. And usually what we're looking for on this side is forgiveness. This whole thing is rather rule oriented. It has a legal taste, and you'll see that on the other side, the shame emotion, it doesn't have this legal taste, it has a different kind of taste to it. Let's go to the shame side. Here, of course, you also grew up with other people, but as Spyro saw in this kibbutz in Israel, as he was studying child rearing techniques or whatever he did there, he realized that these children grew up with a group, not just with one or two significant others, but the whole group of people who functioned as significant others. And he got the impression that that group actually doesn't just teach you some rules, but teaches you more a role, some ideals, something to live up to. Like you're supposed to be a good boy, not just to do this, not to do that, but to be a good boy, to be a good girl, to be a good kibbutzim, a good Jew, or good whatever, roles, in short. And if, of course, you would not comply with these roles, there was a consequence. But here, different from the other side, you can't transgress a role or an ideal, really. This doesn't work. Linguistically, that's kind of a different categories. What happens here is that you fail. Get close in here. That you fail. There's a failure. When you fail, the others abandon you. And this fear of being abandoned, not accepted, expelled out of the group, this fear sticks with you, and this fear becomes what we call the shame emotion. When you're embarrassed, when you're ashamed. So, on this side of things, we talk about the ego ideal, not about the super ego like with the guilt side. But here we talk about the ego ideal, which interjects the roles and the ideals, but does not interject the significant others. Which means, on the guilt side, you can be just by yourself and still feel guilty. On the shame side, somebody has to be there for you, so you feel ashamed. Or, you need to think, you need to have the impression that somebody sees you or knows about it. Then this emotion kicks in. It's a little like a two-component glue. If one thing is missing, it doesn't stick. What's the remedy on this side? The remedy on this side looks a little different. Basically, you don't want people to know about your mistake. The thing is, on the other side, if you broke something, you have a bad conscience, you feel guilty, you go and you confess, and that brings some sort of relief, and you can repair things and fix them. Here, that's just not so possible, because you don't have a problem as long as nobody knows about it. And to go and confess would actually create a problem. So you rather deny it, you cover it, or you avoid people. You blame shift, sometimes you even counterattack. And what you actually want here is not so much forgiveness, because you can't really forgive a transgression. What you want is acceptance. One last but very central point I'd like to make here, in terms of difference between these two emotions, is this whole focus of attention and attribution, we call it actually. On one hand, on the guilt side, the focus is on the deed you've done. You've done this horrible thing. So this horrible thing is the focus. And we call that specific attribution. So this misbehavior, this situation is attributed to something very specific, to a specific deed you've done, but not to you, as is the case on the other side. There, the focus is not so much on the thing you've done, or broken, or whatever, the deed, but it's on you as a person. We call that global attribution. Suddenly, it's about you and who you are, if you're a good person or a bad person. I gave you the example of making a scratch in my car. If you do it by accident, you'll be talking about specific attribution, and we apologize, you would confess, you would try to fix it and repair it, I would forgive you, whatever. If, however, you made it on purpose, then the whole thing is not just attributed to a specific thing, a specific deed, a specific part of you, but then suddenly it needs to be integrated into your identity and who you are. And I would look at you and say, oh my gosh, why would you make a scratch in my car, kind of on purpose? Are you that kind of a person? You see? And this explains why shame is a much, much hotter emotion than guilt. It has much more, psychologists talk about hot and cold emotions, or colder emotions, and this one is very hot. It really generates an incredible heat, and you just want to disappear. And that explains also why you want to deny or even counterattack. I also mentioned to somebody after class that we often talk about, we see that people do something wrong and then would say, well, I don't know why I did it, it just happened. Even though they know why it happened, and maybe they had a reason to do it. But because they don't want it to be something about shame, they don't want to deal with this, they want to be embarrassed and ashamed, they'd rather push it over from one side to the guilt side, and we call it clouding of motives. That they cloud their motives and say, well, I don't know, it just happened. And this is easier to deal with because then I can just confess, fix it, repair, whatever. But if it's something where I know the motives and I tell you why I did it, it's more a thing of who you are and why you do things, and then it becomes more a shame issue, which is very hot and difficult to deal with.